the redacted version of the affidavit used to obtain a warrant for former President Trump's home, was unsealed today by order of a federal judge. What did this document reveal? And where will the investigation go from here? Returning to Washington Watch to help provide context to today's events is John Daukas. He's a former acting assistant attorney general for civil rights, the U.S. Department of Justice. John, good to see you today. Thanks for stopping by.
Nice to be with you again, Joseph.
Now, you had some time to look at this affidavit. From your perspective in the Department of Justice, your experience there, what'd you learn?
Well, Joseph, this is hot off the press, and it's a 38-page document. About 2/3 of it is utterly redacted. There are blank pages. I'm showing this for your viewers at home. I know the folks on the radio can't see it, but about 2/3 of it is simply blacked out. So there's not a whole lot to be learned from this. A couple things that takeaways are that when President Trump had returned 15 boxes of documents, there were allegedly some classified documents in those boxes of documents mingled in with newspaper articles and photos and other materials. But for the most part, the Department of Justice has kept secret its reasons for the search which conducted at Mar-a-Lago.
Are you surprised that the Department of Justice was successful in convincing the judge to redact that information so the public was unable to see it?
I'm a little surprised about the extent of the redactions. And, Joseph, it's a very unfair playing field here where the Department of Justice has been leaking information for the past many weeks now. Yet it then goes to the judge and says, well, we've got to keep all this material secret. So it's a very unfair situation at this point. And I am a little bit surprised that the judge so far has allowed the extent of redactions. I presume the Trump attorneys will continue to push back and ask for additional disclosure.
I'm hoping you might be able to kind of explain the events here, because at first it seemed to be news when the judge determined, in light of the public interest in this case, that this affidavit should be released at all, that came as something of a surprise to the Department of Justice. Then they went to the judge and said, well, if you're going to release it, here's some information we need to keep out. But as you're telling us, most of the relevant information that the public might have had interest in seems to be redacted. So does this represent a complete about face by the judge in this case, where he really has decided that the information the public might be interested in shouldn't be seen by the public?
Well, Joseph, this is very heady stuff for a magistrate judge in the U.S. To be thrown into. And I think he's feeling his way here. Again, he can always order additional disclosures of this information, and that may well happen. Again, it's a little rich here, Joseph, where we had the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, at his press conference say that the Department of Justice speaks through its pleadings. And then we had a steady stream of leaks from the Department of Justice and FBI, apparently to friendly media, about what they claimed they were finding and the reasons for the raid.
Now, the concern in all of this has been that the FBI conducted this raid for political purposes. Of the information that you did see, is there anything there that would lead you to believe one way or another that no, in fact, this was an appropriate conclusion based on the evidence that they had and they weren't necessarily acting politically? Or are we still just left to wonder?
So, Joseph, 2 points. The first is that the FBI, through its misconduct during the Russia collusion hoax, has greatly damaged its credibility. So for the FBI to essentially tell the American people now, hey, just trust us, doesn't wash. I was just looking at a Rasmussen poll that shows that a majority of Americans don't trust the FBI, and agreed with the statement that the FBI is being used by the Biden administration as its personal Gestapo. So the first issue is there's not a lot of trust for the FBI. And I'd remind your listeners that one of the FBI former attorneys, Kevin Kleinsmith, was convicted of using a perjured affidavit to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign in the past. the situation we hear is yet another affidavit signed by an FBI person. Are the American people going to be more apt to believe that, knowing what the FBI has done in the past? The second point I'd very much like to make, which I just don't understand, is what was the urgency? What was the emergency? What was what we lawyers call the exigent circumstances that justified sending the FBI in early in the morning to raid Trump's building, to raid Trump's home with a very broad warrant? Why was if the documents were there, if there are classified documents there, they've been there for over 18 months now. So why was there such an emergency that we had to send armed national police in to do that?
Well, I can imagine the response from the Department of Justice might be, well, if it's classified information, we can't tell you what the emergency is, because then we would be disclosing information that is classified. Is that not a reasonable response from the department?
You know, that's fair enough, Joseph. But at some point, at some time in the future, I think the FBI is going to need to explain why it took this unprecedented and incredible act of raiding a former president's home. You know, if you woke up in the morning and read in the paper that a president of a country had used the national police force to raid his opponent's home, the opposition party leader's home, you wouldn't think this was happening in America. So at some point, there needs to be an explanation of why, for example, the Department of Justice didn't go to a judge and said, look, here's the evidence we have that there's confidential information there that hasn't been returned. Order that return versus a raid.
John, in about 15 seconds, if you can, what do we expect next? Do we just wait for the Department of Justice to do something or not?
I think what we will expect to see next is probably more leaking by the Department of Justice and a push by the Trump side to have more information released.
John Daukas, thank you so much for stopping by today and illuminating us.
Thank you very much for having me again, Joseph.